So it's flipping the way that we approach renovation. Instead of the traditional approach where everything's demolished, sent to landfill, it's about carefully dismantling buildings to recover valuable materials.
We've been seeing the joys of understanding like this material went back to the manufacturer. They're able to remake it back into a product that we can then buy back on the project. So it just really helps to reinforce sort of the circular economy we're trying to create.
Hi, and welcome to Building Conversations. I'm your host, Jenn Taranto, Vice President of Sustainability at STO Building Group. And today we're talking about material circularity in New York City. I'm joined by Ryan Hughes, Sustainability Manager at Structuretown, New York, and Tiffany Williams, Sustainability Manager at Rudin, to talk about how we're working together to reduce waste, recover materials, and make circularity a core part of the building process. Let's jump in. So Ryan, what would you say is New York City's deconstruction program or the initiatives and support that they have around deconstruction, and how's it shifting the way that we approach building renovations and developments?
So New York City's deconstruction program is really an emerging initiative, and it's really aimed at rethinking end-of-life phase for building. So it's flipping the way that we approach renovation. Instead of the traditional approach where everything's demolished, sent to landfill, it's about carefully dismantling buildings to recover valuable materials for reuse and for recycling. So it's really a smarter, more sustainable approach, and it's helping to turn job sites into resource recovery sites.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like a real game changer there in New York City, and very progressive of them to have put a program in place. Just to sort of frame the conversation for others, can you also define for us, how does deconstruction differ from traditional demolition?
The difference is intention. So traditional demo or demolition is focused on speed and removal, but basically out with the old and let's get ready for the new. Deconstruction is more about strategic, tactical, or maybe surgical. So it's about identifying, removing, preserving value of materials for reuse.
Yeah. Tiffany, anything you want to add to that for the listeners?
Yeah, so just to piggyback off of that, I know right now we're really focusing on deconstruction within our office portfolio and just understanding what are a lot of those typical materials that are in those space, what is recoverable, what can we reuse. And so office furniture, the existing millwork, looking at carpet and ceiling tile. Also too, trying to understand the glass throughout the space. So we're looking at the interior spaces, which are storefront systems or office front systems, as well as the exterior glazing of the envelope. There's also opportunities with doors, salvaging doors or recycling doors, both back of house, the hollow metal doors, and even those throughout the space, the solid wood doors. And then any lighting, sconces, fixtures, and things like that, on the smaller scale as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful to help kind of understand what types of materials we can look at that are recoverable and even better reusable. I think the other piece of the puzzle too, not to forget about when you're repositioning or changing the use of a building type. For example, there are going to be a lot of infrastructure components, right, Tiffany?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what's so exciting about this. So, for a lot of the different rating systems and such, LEED will reward you for reusing the actual building envelope. So it's what can you do beyond that? And we have such a great opportunity coming up where we're partnering with McGovern, and we're actually doing what we call selective deconstruction. So it's very similar. It's just not as broad as looking at every single material stream, but really honing in on what material has the most volume within the space that we can recover. And what's so exciting about this is this is Rudin's first time really delving into deconstruction as a full practice. So there's a lot that we're going to learn from this process, and we're very excited to be embarking on this endeavor in partnership with them.
Yeah, so that sort of leads us right into the next question, which was thinking about a recent project that incorporated these demolition practices. Can we kind of unpack a little bit more, what does that collaboration between STO Building Group, Poverty McGovern, and Rudin really look like on that job? So can you walk us through some of the steps that we've taken and where we hope to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, we need to know what's there. We need to understand what's there. So we kicked it off with once we've identified like all the stakeholders and participants, we did like a survey, a site survey, literally top to bottom, and just looked at all the different materials, tried to figure out which vendors essentially the materials belonged to. And then we are fortunate to have sustainability consultants help us with these projects. And so they're actually helping us to organize and coalesce all of that data, create a game plan of, um, like what's the lead time essentially of actually having these vendors come and either assess their materials on site themselves, or like what does it take for them to actually receive the materials back? Because there's a lot of logistics that go into those particular programs. Like certain vendors want their materials packaged a certain way when they want to receive them back to reduce any use of like contamination through that sort of demolition process. And then sometimes they just have like a long lead time because, we've only done this on like a very minor scale. Like we've done some small office fit outs. But when you're thinking about a full building that we're trying to reclaim these materials, it's like, does the vendor actually have capacity to take that much in, that much volume in? And which may require a lot of lead time for them because they may need like staging or some place to be able to keep those materials essentially before they can find like a new home for them. So there's like a lot that goes into it. But having this game plan that the sustainability consultant's helping us to develop is important because we get this information into the bid package, the demolition bid package, which is key because that's like the best opportunity to get the best pricing. We don't want to miss kind of the mark on that end, and to just help educate like the subs and stuff when they're bidding on the project.
Yeah, I would say from my experience, that has been a big game changer is working the reuse and salvage and take back program elements into the contract documents. There have been many projects, sort of you kind of hinted at it, like on the smaller scale that we've done in the past, and oftentimes the desire comes from the client, sort of as a wish list scenario, but isn't fully incorporated into the drawings. And I would say that my experience is that we never get the full-throated like ability to capture all of the materials in the way that we would really like to the cost benefit of the client, right? Because we're trying to do the best within the systems that exist. And the reality is sometimes you may have to pay a little bit more in order to take advantage of salvaging some materials, right?
Agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the environmental and social benefits far outweigh the extra coordination it requires, but a little more time up front, but you get a higher value outcome
Yeah.
and it significantly reduces waste, right?
Agreed. Yeah. So we've been seeing just the joys of understanding like this material went back to the manufacturer. They're able to remake it back into a product that we can then buy back on the project. So it just really helps to reinforce sort of the circular economy we're trying to create.
Yeah, and I would say I had the pleasure of being involved in that pre-demo salvage assessment that we did when we walked through the building, and literally peeling up, floor tiles and seeing who the manufacturer was, and exactly, and then like pulling down ceiling tiles in order to try to see who that manufacturer was. And when you've got a multi-tenanted building like that, you could be dealing with multiple manufacturers across the full spectrum of all the materials, right? So. That plan that the sustainability consultants put in place is going to be super critical. I think another thing that requires a lot of planning is the logistics and the storage and the transportation of those materials, and how that gets managed both during the deconstruction of the project, and then sometimes even when we're trying to do salvage or site separation during projects, during the construction phase of the project. So Ryan, you want to talk a little bit about some of the experience that you've had there?
Sure. Logistics can be tricky. Urban job sites are tight. So we found that staging areas need to be clearly defined. Signage on our dumpsters and collection bins need to be in place, and material labeling is critical for inventory, right? Management there. We work with partners who can store offsite sometimes until the end of use markets can be identified, but that's always a challenge. But in that scenario, when materials are ready for use, resale, or donation, it is possible. But one lesson learned, I'd say, is budget more time in the schedule for the process. Salvaging does take, as we said, a little longer than demo, but the value financially and environmentally is worth it. So if you plan the logistics the same way you plan, say, steel delivery, I know that's, after talking with a friend of mine in that business, it's pretty much, equatable there. So essentially early planning, integrating salvage goals into the project schedule, that's key. a few projects where we've had some success. One of our major tech clients at St. John's Terminal, we integrated some circular practices on the job site where we focused on closed loop drywall recycling. We stage our mini dumpsters on site with some labeling there for the source separated drywall trim scrap in an area that wouldn't really affect the build out, which is a challenge sometimes in the dense urban environment here. But we had a critical mass in place. We called the hauler, loaded the truck until it was full, and then from there sorted the waste. The waste that was sorted was brought to our trusted transfer facility, Cooper Recycling, and then brought back to the manufacturer of certain teed in this instance, where we use that recovered asset as a material feedstock to create new product for them. And the same goes for a carpet take back, which we've used partners like Shaw in our own office for the carpet tile that you said, Jen, here. It's been stripped out of our New York office and then used as feedstock. So they've taken that from us there. Many other tech clients really care about this and that have a vested interest.
Yeah, and we're seeing that interest sort of broaden to multiple sectors now. I think I want to just take a step back a little bit. We talked about the importance of getting the specifications in the early bid phase of the drawings. We've talked a little bit about the logistics, but that coordination piece, I want to kind of like just double click on that because I think it's such a big piece. There's so many different stakeholders that are involved. We've got the contractors. In some cases, there may be city agencies that get involved. We've got salvage partners. Can you talk a little bit more about like how do you get to a successful end product with so many stakeholders involved?
Coordination's everything, right? First, we need, as you said, buy-in from the client, and then design team, and then we conduct that detailed salvage assessment prior to demolition. From then on, we can loop in the salvage partners, and they should be involved very early on to evaluate the materials, the plan for the transportation, ensure the proper handling. Oftentimes, making sure insurance is in place, that could be a challenge. But what's equally important is working with these trusted salvagers and their networks. So we also need to form relationships with groups like Big Reuse, which is a nonprofit retail store and donation center. And then they can commit to receiving and reusing those materials. But it's a lot of moving parts, but with a structured plan and proactive communication, it can be done.
Yeah. And then moving backward even further, Tiffany, you're also doing a lot of coordination with vendors and your sustainability consultants on your side in order to put as much of that information and some of those relationships into the spec. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think one thing that's really important to kind of highlight are a lot of these manufacturers will have like recycling agreements, which are key. They won't take the material back without these agreements because those agreements are mostly like testaments from the owner's side that the material is either safe or, free of any type of harmful materials or anything like that, so that they have the assurance when they're receiving that material back to their place that it's not then contaminating their essential sort of protocols and how they, reuse or reclaim those materials. So that's big. And kind of speaking to that is oftentimes in order for us as an organization to sign off on something like an agreement, we may have our own sort of legal process. And it really will depend on like how involved or how much information our legal team may need, like any insurance that may be required of the vendor, depending upon like how they want to actually access the site. Like, do they need to do their own site walk and an inspection? What level of insurance will they need for that? Or are they actually, bringing a truck on site? Or are they doing like a curbside pickup? Depending on the level of involvement to actually take their material back will sort of trigger something different within like our legal process in review and evaluation. And again, all of it comes down to signing off the recycling agreement, because without that, there's really no sort of green light to kind of continue with that process.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that this process, and it's been my experience as well, is that there's so many more vendors involved really from start to finish. Because, we alluded to before, some of the reuse centers can only take so much of the materials because they don't have endless supplies of storage. And they want to make sure that they're also getting things that they're going to be able to resell. And so, you may find that you end up sort of piecemealing things a little bit more than you would otherwise in order to get them out of the building. So all of that makes a ton of sense. Ryan, I think the other question that I get from a lot of people is about incentives. Does the city have incentives for deconstruction or demolition? And then, if those do exist, how does that impact decision making?
Hmm. Well, to my knowledge, there's no citywide mandate yet, but clients, again, are asking for this. So there's tax benefits and sustainability goals, brand value. Those are all drivers. But in my opinion, the biggest driver, or as far as incentive, is reputational. So clients want to show that they're really building responsibly. Deconstruction makes for a strong story, especially on projects targeting LEED, WELL, or other ESG benchmarks. But yeah, we've had clients choose deconstruction not just because they had to, but because they saw it as part of their values. And again, there's a great story to tell. So in this market, showing you build responsibly is the incentive.
And the other thing that I would add to that for anybody who likes to geek out on greenhouse gas emissions, right? Waste is one of the categories in Scope 3 emissions. And Scope 3 emissions are by far like the biggest bucket for any organization's emissions. So where you can look to reduce, I think is a big benefit, as you pointed out, for anybody who has those kind of ESG metrics. And speaking of metrics, Tiffany, how is Rudin approaching circularity and reuse goals in like the big picture sense? And what is really driving, I think, as an end user, I'm really curious. I think other people listening will be curious. Like, what is driving your interest in this? And then what do you think is holding others back?
Yes, great question. So, we are fortunate where we have a lot of great support from our ownership because they see the value in reuse or recycling. And for them, this was almost a no-brainer. So really just trying to understand, like, how can you package, like, how can deconstruction really push us towards our goal of like circularity and reuse? So we're really trying to use this as like a learning process. We don't have set goals to date, but we want to use this information to understand like the process. We want to use this as like our benchmarking tool to understand what's really feasible and how do you track outcomes from projects such as this so that we can set like more informed goals for the organization and really be able to measure like the benefits of doing something such as like this, like a process such as this and as involved as it can be. So we, our interests are like really being propelled by the growing recognition of this value in material circularity. By using this data and stuff, we do see like there's a great path forward, but of course there are some key hurdles that have been slowing the process down for us, especially with like the smaller projects. Like one of the biggest one is like integrating circularity into like tight project schedules. So we have a little bit of luxury of time with these larger projects that we're coordinating, like the one with PMG or Pavarine, excuse me. But for others that are small, like smaller fit out projects that we could do when tenants turn over and we want to reuse this or reclaim that space, it could be a bit of a challenge to try to have all of like first the site walk and then to get all your agreements in place and to make sure that the proper insurance is on file. To really establish that relationship. But then on top of that, just the legal process sometimes is just not as amenable as you would hope. Because it's, when you are working with a vendor, it's like, who do you sort of hold that relationship with? Is it the demo sub or even the CM that's overseeing the project? Are they the ones that would sort of hold that insurance and liability, or is it the owner? And, oftentimes when it's the owner, we're a bit more cautious and skeptical about entering into agreements that we're not as familiar with. We want to make sure we're just as protected as the vendor is. But of course, the one question that a lot of vendors will have are with like hazardous materials. And it's like, how do you really handle a situation such as that? Like, is there opportunity for abatement? Does that happen on site or off site? Does adding those extra logistics in there help to fuss the sort of story of your circularity, I guess your deconstruction efforts, having to transport materials to one location to be abated and then another location to be recycled? It's like, how does that all fit together? So we've had a lot of questions around like what's really value added to the project by doing specific activities such as that. And then another sort of layer on top of that are like logistical complexities. So, one building with our portfolio has great loading dock access versus others. We don't quite have the same luxury in understanding like how do we, get a truck into the space, or how do we get a truck close enough, or even for some vendors that we work with, they want like a 20-yarder that either sits on the street or in our loading dock, but we don't have the space for that. So it's really trying to create the relationship with the vendor to either find better means and methods for their own sort of procurement and taking back of the material, and then working within our own sort of constraints, logistically speaking, with our sites, have been some of the biggest challenges that have added like the different layers of risk and uncertainty when it comes to deconstruction program. But ultimately, we really believe that as like more policy aligns with the goals, and as we educate, whether or not it's the demo team, and bake something into like the specifications that really helps to leverage these different programs, we know that we can actually move in the right direction.
Something you said triggered another question for me, which was related to some of these smaller tenant spaces. And I'm curious if you see opportunities, or if you maybe even you've started to do this already, to not necessarily demo the space when the previous tenant moves out, to walk a new potential tenant through an existing space, in order to give them the opportunity to maybe maintain some of that space as their new space. Do you see a time where that shift occurs, or maybe you've already seen a case where something like that has happened?
Yeah, we have not, but that's actually an interesting thought. Currently, how our leasing team would like to just have them view a white box, but maybe there is opportunity for us to have that conversation with them, saying, look, there could be potential for them to reuse some of the stuff in the space currently before we do any demo. I do know that sometimes like our existing tenants may just want to grow into more space. That may be like a better opportunity, like I guess, more fluid opportunity to be able to show them like, hey, this is what the space currently looks like. Is there anything here you may want to reuse before we or you renovate that space to your current needs? So I definitely feel like there's some great opportunity there. And that's something that we love to coordinate internally with our team at Rudin.
Yeah, I think that there's potential for a shift in the way that we're sort of currently doing business as usual around some of that stuff, which has some really, really good high potential. And sort of as we're sort of thinking in a forward-looking way about the future, I'm going to ask you each, from your perspectives, what needs to happen next to make material circularity more widespread in New York City construction? Ryan, you want to take the first crack?
Sure. I think you just mentioned it there. First, we need support, infrastructure, and education. So first, clear standards and incentives from the city, really to help normalize deconstruction. We can look at cities like Portland and maybe San Antonio, which already have deconstruction ordinances in place. But if New York City wants to lead, we need more pilot programs. We need mandates. But I'd say second, we need more local warehouses, and we touched on that, or marketplaces to process and resell these salvage materials. And then lastly, third is the education piece. As I said, it's really educating the full project team, from the developers to the subcontractors, really on how reuse fits into their workflow, right? So when everyone's aligned on that, on the why and the how, circularity can become a realistic goal, not just an aspiration, I'd say.
Yeah. Tiffany, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm 100% in alignment with all of that. Just getting the education out there to them, whether you having like the spec, sort of like a standard spec, I guess you would say, for demolition or deconstruction for demolition. And then also working with vendors and partners to create a bit more flexibility with their current means and methods of how they can receive material, or, how material should be processed or provided back to them, I think would be tremendous. And then partnering with other organizations. I feel when you kind of do things in a silo by yourself, you encounter more challenges. But as you have more partners, maybe there's opportunity to do like a sort of like a joint venture or something like that, like a joint pickup where everyone's delivering or picking up on a specific schedule. And then maybe they can use, like to Ryan's point, a transferring facility where things are housed and or kept until the vendors can actually go and pick up. I think that will be tremendous for the success.
Yeah, well, I think you guys have both outlined what seems to be a fabulous future, and I'm happy to be partnering with Rudin on their objectives and goals. And I think that you're absolutely right. We need more collaborators. We need more people all in to put some pressure on the system and create a new process that works for everyone. So thank you both for joining me today and having this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.